I woke up in room 402 of St. Jude's Hospital with a heart monitor ticking quietly beside my bed, only to find out that my own flesh and blood had sold my life's work out from under me. I was 71 years old, recovering from an emergency double bypass surgery, when my youngest daughter, Laura, walked into the room carrying a cup of cold hospital coffee. She didn't ask how I was feeling. She didn't look me in the eye. Instead, she set a crisp white envelope on my bedside table and said, "Dad, we had to make a tough decision. It's for your own good. The house was just too much for you to handle." I stared at her, the rhythmic beep of the heart monitor suddenly accelerating. "What do you mean, Laura?" "David and I signed the closing papers yesterday," she said softly, adjusting her purse strap. "The buyers paid $800,000 in cash. We're moving your things into a senior care facility on Tuesday. The doctor agrees you can't live alone anymore." My heart sank into a pit of absolute ice. I had built that 4-bedroom stone house in the valley with my own hands back in 1982. Every beam, every floorboard, every oak cabinet in the kitchen was set by my palm. It wasn't just a structure. It was where my late wife, Sarah, had laughed, where we had raised our 3 children, and where 40 years of family history were etched into the door frames. "David signed it?" I whispered, my voice trembling under the plastic oxygen cannula. "How could David sign anything? He doesn't own my house." Laura shifted uncomfortably, avoiding my gaze. "Dad, you gave him medical and financial power of attorney 3 years ago when you had that mild stroke. He used it. The bank accepted it. The title company cleared it. It's done, Dad. The deal is closed." When Laura left the room, I lay in the dim hospital light, staring at the ceiling. The physical pain in my chest was nothing compared to the crushing agony in my soul. David was my eldest son, a man I had funded through law school, a son I had trusted implicitly. I had signed that power of attorney form years ago, purely as a safeguard in case I went into a coma, never dreaming he would use it like a weapon while I was sedated in an ICU. 2 days later, against the doctor's explicit advice, I discharged myself from the hospital. I couldn't just sit in a sanitized room while my children stripped away my dignity. I took a cab straight to my stone house on Pine Ridge Road. When the cab pulled up the long gravel driveway, my heart shattered into 1,000 pieces. A large yellow "Sold" sign was staked into the front lawn. Moving vans were parked near the porch, and 2 workers were loading my late wife's hand-carved mahogany dining table into the back of a truck. Standing near the front porch were my son David, his wife Evelyn, and Laura. They were laughing, holding paper cups of coffee, arguing cheerfully about how to divide the remaining furniture. As I stepped out of the taxi, leaning heavily on my wooden cane, David's smile instantly vanished. He looked at me with a mixture of irritation and guilt. "Dad, what are you doing here?" David demanded, taking a quick step toward me. "You're supposed to be in bed. Laura told you we arranged everything." "You sold my home, David," I said, my voice quiet, steady, but vibrating with profound betrayal. Evelyn, my daughter-in-law, crossed her arms and stepped forward, her voice sharp and defensive. "Arthur, don't be dramatic. You're 71 and you just had open-heart surgery. You can't mow 3 acres of lawn. David did what any responsible son would do. We saved you from drowning in property taxes and maintenance costs."
"You saved yourselves," I said, looking from Evelyn to David. "Where is the money from the sale, David?" David blinked, shuffling his feet. It's held in a trust account for your care, Dad. Naturally, there are administrative fees, and we had to settle some family obligations." "Family obligations?" I asked softly. "You mean your failed real estate investment in the city, or Evelyn's boutique debt?" David's face turned beet red. "That's none of your business. Look, Dad, the papers are recorded at the county courthouse. The buyer signed the final wires this morning. The property no longer belongs to you. You need to get back in the cab and let us handle this." I stood there on the driveway I had paved 30 years ago, looking at my children. They weren't monsters, or at least They hadn't started out that way. They were just ordinary people who had allowed subtle greed, financial desperation, and arrogance to rot their moral core. They saw an old man in a hospital bed and decided he was an obstacle to be cleared, a quick paycheck to solve their middle-aged failures. "Who bought it?" I asked quietly. "A real estate developer from out of state," Laura interjected quickly, trying to sound soothing. "A man named Mr. Harrison. He bought it sight unseen for cash. He's turning the whole valley plot into a private residential estate. Dad, please, just come with us to the facility. It's really nice." "I built this house, Laura," I said, looking her straight in the eyes. "Your mother died in the master bedroom. You took your first steps on this porch, and you sold it behind my back while I was bleeding on a surgeon's table." Without waiting for another fake excuse, I turned around, got back into the taxi, and told the driver to take me to the office of Walter Vance. Walter was my oldest friend, a retired country lawyer who had known me since we were teenagers. His office was a small, dusty room filled with old, legal manuals and the smell of stale pipe tobacco. When I walked in, leaning on my cane, Walter nearly dropped his spectacles. "Arthur, what in God's name are you doing out of the hospital?" Walter exclaimed, jumping up to help me into a leather armchair. "I heard about your surgery." "Walter," I said, leaning my head back against the leather, my breath coming short. "David used the 2021 power of attorney to sell Pine Ridge Road. He closed the deal yesterday while I was in ICU." Walter froze, his jaw dropping. "He did what?" I said, "He sold it to an out-of-state developer named Harrison for $800,000. He told me it's a done deal, recorded at the county." Walter slapped his desk in sudden fury. "That ungrateful little viper! I drafted that power of attorney for you, Arthur, and it specifically contained a fiduciary limitation clause. David had no legal authority to sell your primary residence unless 2 independent physicians certified you as permanently mentally incapacitated. Did he get those certifications?" Walter leaned over his computer, his hands flying across the keyboard as he accessed the county clerk's online database. For 10 long minutes, the only sound in the office was the click of the mouse and the ticking of an old grandfather clock in the corner. Finally, Walter leaned back, his eyes narrowing as he read the screen. "Arthur, something isn't right here." "What do you mean?"
"The deed transfer filed yesterday doesn't list a corporate developer," Walter said slowly. "The buyer isn't an out-of-state investment firm. The named buyer on the deed is a private individual named Marcus Vance." I sat up straight, a surge of adrenaline cutting through my surgical pain. "Marcus? Your nephew, Marcus?" "Marcus is a senior corporate auditor for the State Land Registry," Walter said, his voice dropping into a tense murmur. "Why would Marcus buy your house, and where did David get the authority to execute this specific deed?" Walter grabbed his desk phone and dialed a number. He put it on speakerphone. After 3 rings, a deep, calm male voice answered. "Marcus speaking." "Marcus, it's your Uncle Walter. I'm sitting here with Arthur Miller." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. Then Marcus let out a slow, deliberate breath. "Uncle Walter, is Arthur okay? Did he survive the surgery?" "I'm alive, Marcus, and I'm sitting right here. Why did you buy my house from my son?" What Marcus told us over the next 5 minutes sent a chill straight down my spine, shattering every assumption I had made about my family's betrayal. "Arthur," Marcus said quietly, "David didn't sell your house to save you, and he didn't sell it to an out-of-state investment firm. 6 months ago, David and Evelyn took out a massive, illegal private loan against your estate using a forged signature. They owed $400,000 to a predatory hard money lender who was threatening to foreclose on your land and strip you of everything." I gripped my cane so hard my knuckles turned white. "A forged signature?" "Yes," Marcus continued. David knew that if the hard money lender foreclosed, it would go to a public auction, and you would be thrown onto the street with $0. David came to my registry office 3 weeks ago, begging for help, trying to find a way to quietly cover up the debt before you found out. He was planning to sell the house, pay off his secret loan, take the leftover cash for himself, and put you in a cheap nursing home so you'd never ask questions. "So why did you buy it, Marcus?" Walter demanded. "Because I realized what David was doing. If a third-party developer bought that house, Arthur would have lost it forever. I used my personal savings and a bank line of credit to intercept the sale. I bought the deed under my name to stop the hard money lender from seizing the property at auction."
My mind was spinning. The betrayal wasn't just about greed. It was about a web of financial crime and cowardice my son had been weaving behind my back for years. David hadn't just used a power of attorney. He had committed grand fraud, using my lifelong home as collateral for his reckless lifestyle, and then tried to discard me in a facility so his crime would stay buried in the dark. "Marcus," I asked, my voice barely a whisper, "where are the closing funds right now?" "The title company holds the $800,000 in an escrow clearing account," Marcus explained. "David and Evelyn are scheduled to meet with the escrow officer at 4 p.m. today to sign the final disbursement papers and claim the net cash." I looked at the grandfather clock on Walter's wall. It was 3:15 p.m. "Walter," I said, standing up despite the sharp pain tearing through my chest, "get your coat. We're going to the title company." At 3:59 p.m., David, Evelyn, and Laura were sitting around an oak conference table on the 3rd floor of the First National Title Building. They were dressed in their finest clothes, sipping bottled water, whispering excitedly to one another. On the table before them lay a stack of disbursement checks totaling hundreds of thousands of dollars. David was holding a pen, a victorious smile plastered across his face. "Once this clears," he whispered to Evelyn, "we clear the lender, buy the lake condo, and we're completely in the clear." "What about your father?" Laura whispered, a tiny flicker of hesitation in her voice. "What if he checks his bank accounts?" "Dad is 71 and recovering from heart surgery," David said coldly, setting his pen on the paper. "He doesn't know how to access online banking. He'll be comfortable in the care home, and in 6 months he won't even remember Pine Ridge Road." Suddenly, the heavy oak doors of the conference room swung open. David stopped mid-sentence. Evelyn dropped her water bottle. I walked into the room, flanked by Walter Vance and 2 uniformed county sheriff's deputies. Behind us walked Marcus Vance, holding a thick leather dossier. David's face drained of all color, turning a sickly, ghostly white. He scrambled to his feet, knocking his chair backward against the wall. "Dad, what is this? Why are the police here?" "Sit down, David," my voice carrying a quiet, terrifying weight that made the entire room freeze. "Arthur, this is private business," Evelyn shrieked, jumping up to stand beside her husband. "You have no right to barge in here with officers. David has full power of attorney." Walter stepped forward, pulling a legal injunction from his jacket. "That power of attorney was revoked 2 hours ago by court order, Evelyn. Furthermore, the power of attorney David presented to this title company was legally void from the moment he attempted to transfer primary residential property without medical certification."
"This is ridiculous," David shouted, his voice cracking with rising panic. "I'm his son. I was acting in his best interest." "Were you acting in my best interest when you forged my signature on a $400,000 hard money mortgage 8 months ago, David?" I asked, looking him directly in the eyes. The silence that fell over the room was deafening. Laura gasped, turning her head toward her brother in utter shock. "David, what is he talking about? You said Dad approved that loan." David couldn't speak, his lip trembling, his eyes darting frantically around the room, searching for an exit that didn't exist. "You thought me weak," I said, stepping closer to the table, leaning both hands on my cane. "You thought because I was old, because I loved you, because I gave you everything I ever earned, that I would just sit in a hospital bed and let you erase my existence?" "Dad, please," David stammered, his arrogant posture completely crumbling as tears of terror began to stream down his face. I got in over my head. The investors were threatening me. They were going to ruin my career. I was going to pay it back. I swear I was." "You didn't just break the law, David," I said, feeling a deep, agonizing sorrow wash over my soul. "You broke your father's heart. You looked at the house I built for your mother, the house where you grew up, and you saw nothing more than a pile of cash to cover up your cowardice." Marcus stepped forward, setting a fresh set of documents on the table. "The escrow funds are frozen," Marcus announced calmly. "The illegal hard money mortgage has been flagged for criminal fraud investigation. The county prosecutor has already been notified." Evelyn fell back into her chair, burying her face in her hands, sobbing uncontrollably. Laura backed away toward the corner of the room, shaking her head, weeping with shame. David looked at me, his hands shaking, his voice reduced to a pathetic, high-pitched whimper. "Dad, please, don't do this. I'm your son. You can't let them arrest me. Please." I looked at the man I had raised, the boy I used to carry on my shoulders through the apple orchards behind our home. I felt no anger, no desire for vengeance, no satisfaction in his downfall. I only felt a vast, aching void where a family used to be. "I gave you my life, David. I gave you my home, my trust, and my love, but I will not give you my dignity." I turned my back on him. "Deputy," Walter said quietly to the officers, "execute the warrant." As the handcuffs clicked around my son's wrists and his panicked cries echoed down the sterile hallway, I walked out of the building into the cool, late afternoon air. 2 hours later, the moving vans were gone from Pine Ridge Road. Marcus had formally transferred the primary deed back into my personal, exclusive name, dissolving the fraudulent sale entirely. The house was dark and completely silent when I opened the front door. I walked slowly through the grand foyer. The floorboards creaked under my feet, a sound I had known for 40 years. My furniture was back in place, but the silence inside the house was heavier than it had ever been. I walked into the kitchen, filled the old kettle with water, and placed it on the stove. I turned the knob, watching the soft blue flame flicker to life in the dim evening light. While the water heated, I walked into the living room and sat down in my old armchair beside the cold stone fireplace. On the mantel sat a dusty framed photograph from 1995. In the picture, my wife Sarah was smiling warmly, and a younger David was standing beside me, proudly holding a wooden trophy he had won in high school, his arms wrapped tightly around my neck. Justice had prevailed. My home was safe. The law had protected my rights, and no one would ever take this land from me again. But as I sat alone in the quiet dusk, listening to the soft whistle of the kettle in the kitchen, holding my cold, calloused hands together in my lap, tears flowed silently down my weathered cheeks. I had won the battle for my house, but I had lost my children. And I realized then that a man can rebuild a roof of stone and timber, but no court in the world can ever rebuild a broken heart.